On the 60th floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, billionaire CEO Victoria Langford just fired a man who didn't beg, didn't cry, didn't fight back. He simply asked her not to tell his daughter he'd failed. That one sentence, spoken with broken dignity, would crack open the heart she'd spent 30 years building into steel. What Victoria didn't know was that this firing was supposed to be a test. What she couldn't predict was that the quiet man standing before her would become the mirror, forcing her to face everything she'd lost in her ruthless climb to power. If you want to see how a single act of cruelty became the beginning of redemption, stay with me until the end. And please, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The executive conference room on the 60th floor smelled like leather, ambition, and fear. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed Manhattan like a conquered kingdom, steel and glass stretching toward a sky that seemed closer here than anywhere else on Earth. This was the room where careers were made, where futures were destroyed, where Victoria Langford ruled with the kind of cold precision that had built an empire and burned every bridge behind her. She stood at the head of the table now, perfectly composed in a charcoal suit that cost more than most people earned in a month. Her dark hair was pulled back without a strand out of place. Her expression revealed nothing, not anger, not satisfaction, not even the faintest flicker of doubt. At 42, Victoria had mastered the art of emotional invisibility. It was her greatest weapon. "Mr. Cole," she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "You're fired." The words landed in the room with devastating finality. Ethan Cole stood 10 feet away, flanked by 2 HR representatives who'd escorted him up from the research department without explanation. He was 34 but looked older, the kind of worn-down older that came from too many sleepless nights and too much responsibility carried alone. His shirt was clean but frayed at the collar. His tie was knotted carefully but slightly crooked. His hands hung at his sides, calloused and still. He didn't move. The HR reps exchanged glances. They'd done this dozens of times. Usually there was begging. Sometimes there was anger, shouting, threats. Security called to remove someone who couldn't accept their fate. Occasionally there were tears. But Ethan Cole just stood there, his gray eyes fixed on some point past Victoria's shoulder, his jaw tight but his breathing steady. Victoria watched him with the same clinical detachment she brought to every termination. She'd learned long ago not to personalize these moments. Business was business. Weakness was weakness. And Ethan Cole's recent performance reviews had flagged him as a liability. Distracted, underperforming, missing deadlines. The numbers didn't lie. "Do you have anything to say?" she asked. The question wasn't kindness. It was procedure. Give them a chance to speak. Document their response. Move on. Ethan's throat worked. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but clear. "How long do I have?" "Security will escort you out today," Victoria said. "HR will contact you regarding final compensation and benefits transition." "Today," Ethan repeated softly, as if testing the weight of the word. One of the HR reps, a woman named Sandra, with kind eyes and 15 years of practice delivering bad news gently, stepped forward. "Mr. Cole, we understand this is difficult. We're prepared to offer—" "I have one request," Ethan interrupted. His gaze finally moved, settling on Victoria with an intensity that made something uncomfortable shift in her chest. "Please, don't tell my daughter. Let her believe I'm still trying." The room went absolutely still. Victoria felt something crack inside her, just a hairline fracture, barely perceptible, but there. She covered it instantly with a slight frown. "Your daughter?" "She's 6, Ethan said. His voice remained steady, but his hands had curled into fists at his sides. Not in anger, but in the effort of holding himself together. She believes I'm doing important work here, that I'm making a difference. She draws pictures of skyscrapers and tells her friends her dad helps build the future." He paused, swallowing hard. "If she finds out I got fired, she'll think I failed. She'll think I'm not good enough, and His voice fractured, just slightly. "I can't be the reason she stops believing things can get better." The crack in Victoria's chest widened. She'd fired hundreds of people in her career. She'd heard every excuse, every plea, every manipulation. People begged for their jobs because of mortgages, medical bills, aging parents, educational debt. They appealed to her sense of fairness, her humanity, her business sense. They tried anger and tears and desperate promises to do better. But Ethan Cole wasn't asking for his job back. He was asking her to lie to a 6-year-old girl so she wouldn't lose faith in her father. Victoria's carefully maintained expression flickered just for a second before she locked it back down. "That's not a reasonable request, Mr. Cole." "I know," Ethan said quietly, "but it's the only one I'm making." The silence stretched. Sandra shifted uncomfortably. The other HR rep, a younger man named Marcus, cleared his throat but said nothing. Through the windows behind Victoria, a helicopter drifted past, its rotors inaudible through the thick glass. Victoria had built her entire life on control, on making hard decisions without hesitation, on never letting emotion interfere with business. She'd sacrificed relationships, friendships, anything that might make her weak. Her father had taught her that strength meant standing alone. That power came from the willingness to do what others couldn't. Looking at Ethan Cole now, this exhausted, worn-down man asking nothing for himself, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Doubt. "Security will escort you out," she heard herself say. The words came out automatic, mechanical. Effective immediately. Ethan nodded once. He didn't thank her, didn't curse her. He simply turned toward the door with a dignity that felt like an accusation. "Mr. Cole," Victoria said. He stopped, not turning back. "Your daughter," Victoria continued, hating the way her voice sounded, uncertain, almost gentle. "What's her name?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that seemed to fill the entire room. "Lily." Then he walked out, and Victoria stood alone at the head of her empire, feeling like she'd just lost something she couldn't name. The elevator ride down felt longer than 60 floors should take. Ethan stood between two security guards, professionals who'd learned to make these escorts impersonal. They didn't speak, didn't make eye contact, just accompanied him down to the lobby where he'd sign final papers, surrender his ID badge, and walk out into a city that suddenly felt hostile. His mind was racing, but his body felt numb, fired. After 3 years of 16-hour days and weekends spent finishing projects while Lily colored at his desk, after sacrificing sleep and health and anything resembling a social life to prove he deserved to be here, the numbers on the elevator display counted down. 53, 52, 51. Ethan closed his eyes and saw Lily's face that morning. Gap-toothed smile, wild brown curls she'd refused to let him brush, dinosaur pajamas she'd insisted on wearing under her school clothes. She'd made him breakfast, burnt toast with too much jelly, and presented it with such pride that he'd eaten every bite and told her it was perfect. "Daddy, are you building something important today?" she'd asked while he tied her shoes. "Always, sweetheart," he'd answered, kissing the top of her head. "Every day is important." "When I grow up, I'm going to work in a big building like you," she'd announced, "and I'm going to help people too." The memory twisted like a knife. 37, 36, 35. How was he going to tell her? How was he going to explain that he'd lost the job he'd promised would secure their future? The job he'd taken after Sarah died, when grief and single parenthood had left him scrambling for anything that offered stability and benefits and the hope that maybe, somehow, he could build a life where Lily didn't have to worry. 22, 21, 20. The elevator dinged softly as it passed each floor. Ethan thought about his apartment, a one-bedroom in Queens where Lily slept in the bedroom and he took the couch. About the careful budget that left no room for emergencies. About the childcare situation that depended on neighbors and a patchwork of favors he'd never be able to fully repay. About how he was going to pay rent next month. The lobby appeared. Marble floors, contemporary art, a reception desk staffed by people trained to smile at everyone while seeing no one. Ethan signed the termination papers without reading them, surrendered his badge, accepted a cardboard box containing the personal items security had already retrieved from his desk, a framed photo of Lily, a coffee mug she'd made him at school, 3 protein bars he kept for nights when he worked too late to eat. That was it. 3 years reduced to a box that barely weighed anything. "Do you need us to call a car?" one of the security guards asked. It was the first thing either of them had said. Ethan shook his head. "I'll take the subway." Outside, the late afternoon sun felt aggressive. Manhattan moved around him with its usual indifferent energy, people rushing, horns blaring, the smell of pretzels and exhaust, and expensive perfume mixing in the air. Ethan stood on the sidewalk holding his box, feeling untethered. His phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Chen, the neighbor who picked Lily up from school on days when Ethan couldn't leave work early. Lily's home safe. She wants to know if you can help with homework tonight. Something about fractions? Ethan's throat tightened. He typed back quickly. I'll be home soon. Tell her I can't wait to see what she's learning. He stood there for another moment, looking up at the building he'd just been escorted out of. 60 floors of glass and steel and ambition. Somewhere up there, Victoria Langford was probably already moving on to her next meeting, her next decision, her next demonstration of the ruthless efficiency that had built her reputation. She would never think about him again. Ethan turned away and headed for the subway, carrying his entire professional life in a cardboard box. Victoria stood at her office window, staring at nothing. The termination should have taken 5 minutes, should have been routine. Fire the underperformer, document the decision, move on to the quarterly projections that needed her attention before tomorrow's board meeting. Instead, she'd been standing here for 20 minutes, unable to focus on anything except the image of Ethan Cole's face when he'd asked her not to tell his daughter he'd failed. Ms. Langford, her assistant's voice came through the intercom. The legal team is waiting in conference room B. Victoria didn't move. Tell them I need 15 minutes. Of course. Silence returned. Through the window, Manhattan spread out below her like a circuit board, millions of people pursuing their own ambitions, fighting their own battles, carrying their own burdens. From up here, it all looked orderly, manageable, reducible to patterns and probabilities. Victoria had spent her entire adult life learning to see the world this way. When she'd taken over her father's struggling tech company at 25, everyone had expected her to fail. A woman too young, too inexperienced, too emotional to handle the pressure. She'd proved them all wrong by becoming exactly what they feared, harder than any of them, colder than they could imagine, willing to make decisions that would haunt weaker people. Within 5 years, she'd turned the company around. Within 10, she'd expanded it into a multi-billion-dollar empire. Within 15, she'd become one of the most powerful CEOs in the country, feared, respected, and completely alone. She'd lost her marriage in year 7. David had been kind, patient, supportive, everything a partner should be, but he'd wanted things Victoria couldn't give. Time, vulnerability, the possibility of children. He'd asked her once why she was so afraid of letting anyone see who she really was. She told him there was nothing to see. Business was who she was. He'd left 6 months later. She'd barely noticed. Her father had died in year 12. In the hospital, barely conscious, he'd gripped her hand with surprising strength and whispered, "You did it, Victoria. You became strong enough to stand alone." She'd thought it was a compliment. Now, standing in her office with Ethan Cole's words echoing in her mind, she wondered if it had been a warning. Please don't tell my daughter. Let her believe I'm still trying. Victoria's jaw tightened. She turned away from the window and pulled up Ethan Cole's employment file on her computer. The screen filled with data, performance reviews, project assignments, attendance records. The numbers told a clear story. 6 months ago, Ethan's work had been exemplary. Innovative research, exceeded deadlines, positive peer reviews. Then something had changed. His productivity had dropped. He'd started missing meetings. His last 3 projects had been delivered late, and while the work was technically solid, it lacked the creative edge his earlier contributions had shown. The recommendation for termination had come from his direct supervisor, backed by HR's analysis. Standard procedure. Clear justification. Victoria scrolled further back in the file. 3 years ago, Ethan had been hired with strong recommendations from his previous employer, a smaller research firm where he'd been described as brilliant but underutilized. His interview notes mentioned a recent personal tragedy, but assessed him as highly motivated and stable. She found the reference buried in an HR memo. Candidate recently widowed. Has a young daughter. Seeking position with better benefits and stability. Demonstrated strong commitment during interview process. Victoria sat back in her chair. Widowed. Young daughter. She thought about this calculation she'd made 1,000 times before, that personal problems were exactly that. Personal. That the company couldn't be responsible for every employee's life circumstances. That maintaining standards meant making hard decisions regardless of someone's sob story. But Ethan hadn't given her a sob story. He hadn't mentioned being widowed, hadn't talked about struggling as a single father, hadn't asked for special treatment or second chances. He'd only asked her to protect his daughter's faith in him. Victoria's phone rang. She ignored it. The intercom buzzed again, her assistant's voice more insistent. "Ms. Langford, the legal team really needs—" "I said 15 minutes, Victoria snapped. The line went dead. She stared at Ethan's file, at the trajectory from exemplary to underperforming, and forced herself to ask a question she usually dismissed as irrelevant. What happened 6 months ago? It took her 20 minutes of cross-referencing to find it. A hospitalization record submitted to HR, emergency appendectomy for his daughter, 3 days of missed work, then a note from his supervisor expressing concern about distraction and decreased focus. Victoria opened the company's benefits portal and pulled up Ethan's medical claims. What she found made her stomach turn. Multiple doctor visits for his daughter over the past 6 months. Physical therapy. Specialist consultations. All covered by insurance, but the deductibles and copays had to be staggering on his salary. No claims for himself despite the HR file noting he'd shown up to work visibly sick on multiple occasions. She found a memo from building security. Ethan had been discovered sleeping in his office twice in the past 3 months. When questioned, he'd apologized and explained he'd just lost track of time working late. The picture came into focus with brutal clarity. A single father working himself into the ground to pay medical bills, sacrificing sleep, health, and eventually job performance to be there for his daughter, slowly drowning, but never once asking for help. And Victoria had fired him. She closed the file and sat in the silence of her office, surrounded by the awards and achievements that marked her ruthless climb to the top. Through the window, the sun was setting, painting Manhattan in shades of gold and shadow. Please don't tell my daughter. Let her believe I'm still trying. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Victoria Langford felt something that terrified her more than any business challenge ever had. She felt ashamed. The subway ride home was a blur of noise and strangers. Ethan sat with the cardboard box on his lap, staring at nothing while the train rocked and swayed through the tunnels beneath the city. Around him, people scrolled through phones, read books, dozed with the practiced ease of commuters who'd learned to sleep through anything. He thought about what he was going to say to Lily. The truth? That he'd lost his job because he'd been too distracted by making sure she was okay after her appendectomy? That he'd been too exhausted from splitting his time between work and her physical therapy appointments to give his projects the attention they deserved? That he'd failed to be good enough at the impossible task of being both mother and father? No. He couldn't tell her that. Couldn't make her think any of this was her fault, but he also couldn't lie. Lily was too smart, too perceptive. She'd know something was wrong. She always knew. The train pulled into his stop. Ethan gathered the box and stepped onto the platform, joining the flow of people heading toward the exits. The walk to his apartment building took 15 minutes, past the bodega where he bought milk and bread, past the playground where Lily spent every possible moment on the swings, past the Vietnamese restaurant that made the pho she loved on her birthday. Every step felt heavier than the last. Mrs. Chen answered her door before he could knock. She was 73, widowed like him, and had taken to Lily with a grandmother's fierce affection from the day they'd moved in across the hall. "Ethan," she said, her smile fading as she took in the box. His expression, the defeat he couldn't quite hide. "What happened?" "I need to talk to Lily," he said quietly. "Is she—" "Playing in your apartment. I have the spare key, you know." Mrs. Chen's eyes were sharp with concern. "Did you lose your job?" Ethan nodded, not trusting his voice. Mrs. Chen made a soft sound of distress. Then, being who she was, she straightened her shoulders and touched his arm with surprising strength. "You're a good father, Ethan Cole. The best I've ever seen. Whatever happened, that girl in there knows how much you love her. Don't you forget that." "Thank you," Ethan managed. And you come to me if you need help with meals, Mrs. Chen continued firmly. I make too much anyway. It would be a favor to me. Ethan's throat tightened. He nodded again and let himself into his apartment. The space was small but meticulously kept because Lily deserved order and cleanliness even if he couldn't give her square footage. She'd covered the refrigerator with drawings, made a reading corner in the living room with pillows and her favorite books, declared the tiny kitchen table the best homework spot in the whole world. She was there now, sprawled on her stomach with math worksheets spread around her, tongue poking out in concentration. When she heard the door, she looked up with a smile that broke his heart. "Daddy, you're early!" She scrambled to her feet and launched herself at him. Ethan set down the box quickly and caught her, holding on tighter than he meant to. She smelled like the strawberry shampoo she insisted on using and the crayons she'd been drawing with earlier. "Hey, sweetheart," he said into her hair. "I'm doing fractions and they're really hard, but I almost understand them," Lily announced, pulling back to look at him. "Mrs. Chen said you could help me and—" She stopped, her expression shifting to concern. "Daddy, what's wrong? You look sad." And there it was. The perceptiveness that meant he could never hide anything from her for long. Ethan set her down and knelt so they were eye level. He tried to find the words that would make this okay, that would protect her from worry, that would keep her faith in him intact. "I need to tell you something," he began. Lily's eyes went wide and solemn. "Are you sick? Like Mommy was?" The question hit him like a physical blow. Sarah had been sick for 18 months before she died, breast cancer that they'd caught too late. Lily had been 4 years old, just old enough to understand that Mommy was getting sicker, not old enough to understand that she wasn't coming back. "No, baby, I'm not sick," Ethan said quickly, taking her hands. "I'm healthy. I promise." Relief flooded Lily's face. "Okay. Then what is it?" Ethan took a breath. "I lost my job today, the one at the big building." Lily's forehead crinkled with confusion. "They don't want you to work there anymore?" "They don't need me to work there anymore," Ethan corrected gently, hating the half-truth but unable to tell her he'd failed their standards. "So I'm going to find a new job. A different one." "Oh." Lily processed this with the seriousness she brought to everything important. "Will the new job be in a big building too?" "I don't know yet. But wherever it is, I'm going to work really hard, just like always." "Because you're the best worker," Lily said with absolute certainty. "Mrs. Chen says so. She says you work harder than anybody." Ethan's eyes burned. He pulled Lily into another hug to hide it. "I'm going to do my best, sweetheart. That's all I can promise." "That's okay," Lily said into his shoulder. "Your best is really good, Daddy." They stayed like that for a long moment. Then Lily pulled back with sudden determination. "Should we celebrate?" "Celebrate?" Ethan couldn't help a surprised laugh. "Yeah, you always said that when something ends, it means something new can start. Remember? When we left the old apartment, you said it meant we got to find a better one. And we did. So maybe you'll find a better job now, too." The wisdom of 6-year-olds. The ability to find hope in everything. The faith that had somehow survived her mother's death and her father's exhaustion and all the small disappointments of a life that hadn't been easy. Ethan looked at his daughter, at the gap-toothed smile and wild curls and absolute trust in her eyes, and felt something shift in his chest. She believed in him, not because he was perfect, not because he never failed, but because he always tried. Because he'd taught her that trying mattered more than succeeding, that getting back up mattered more than never falling down. "Please don't tell my daughter. Let her believe I'm still trying." He'd asked Victoria Langford not to take this away from him. This moment right here, Lily's faith that her father would figure it out, that things would be okay because he was doing his best. "You know what?" Ethan said, managing a real smile. "You're absolutely right. We should celebrate. What do you want for dinner?" "Pizza!" Lily yelled immediately. Ethan winced thinking about his budget, then decided that some things mattered more than money. "Pizza it is, but you have to finish your fractions first." "Deal!" Lily raced back to the table with renewed energy. Ethan watched her attack the math problems with determination and felt the weight of the day settle onto his shoulders. Tomorrow, he would start job hunting. Tomorrow, he would panic about rent and bills and how long their savings would last. But tonight, he would eat pizza with his daughter and help her with homework and tuck her in with stories about brave knights and clever princesses. Tonight, he would be the father she needed him to be. Even if the whole world thought he wasn't good enough, Lily's faith would have to be enough to carry him forward. It was all he had left. Victoria stayed in her office until the cleaning crew arrived at 10 p.m. She'd canceled the legal meeting, postponed 2 conference calls, ignored 17 emails marked urgent. Instead, she'd spent 6 hours doing something she'd never done before in her entire career. She'd reconsidered a decision. The file on Ethan Cole was spread across her desk now. Not just the official HR documents, but everything she'd been able to pull from the system. Project reports going back 3 years, peer reviews, security logs, medical claims, a complete picture of a man she'd fired after a 5-minute conversation. What she'd found had shaken the foundation of everything she thought she knew about running a company. Ethan Cole wasn't underperforming because he was incompetent. He was underperforming because he was dying by inches trying to be 2 parents on 1 salary while his daughter recovered from a medical emergency. His earlier work had been exceptional, the kind of innovative thinking that could have led to breakthroughs if he'd been given support instead of scrutiny. His colleagues described him as selfless, brilliant, and someone who makes everyone around him better. His supervisor had recommended termination. Victoria pulled up that supervisor's file next. Richard Brennan, 47, 15 years with the company. His performance reviews were solid but unremarkable. His project success rate was good but not exceptional. His department had the highest turnover in the company. Victoria cross-referenced exit interviews from people who'd left Brennan's team. The comments painted a picture. Micromanagement. Takes credit for others' work. No support for work-life balance. Punishes people for having personal emergencies. She thought about the memo recommending Ethan's termination. The language was technically correct but emotionally cold. Decreased productivity, missed deadlines, appears distracted and uncommitted. No mention of his previous excellence, no acknowledgement of his circumstances, no suggestion that he might need support rather than punishment, just a recommendation to cut losses and move on. Victoria sat back in her chair and stared at the ceiling. How many other Ethan Coles were out there? How many talented people had she lost because the company's systems were designed to reward ruthlessness and punish humanity? How many potential breakthroughs had been sacrificed because someone like Richard Brennan saw empathy as weakness? Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus in HR. Ms. Langford, the Cole termination paperwork needs your signature by tomorrow morning for legal compliance. Should I send it up? Victoria stared at the message for a long time. Then she typed back, No. Schedule a meeting with me first thing tomorrow. We need to discuss this case further. Is there a problem with the documentation? There's a problem with the decision. I'll explain tomorrow. She set down the phone and looked at Ethan's photo in the file. It was his employee badge picture, a few years old, before whatever had hollowed out his eyes and put that weight on his shoulders. He was smiling slightly, like he'd been trying not to laugh at something. Please don't tell my daughter. Victoria had spent her entire life believing that strength meant never letting emotion influence business decisions. That power came from the ability to be ruthless when necessary. That showing weakness was the fastest way to lose everything you'd built. Looking at that photo now, she wondered if she'd been wrong about everything. The cleaning crew knocked on her door. Victoria waved them away and returned to the window, watching the city lights glitter in the darkness below. Somewhere out there, Ethan Cole was probably tucking his daughter into bed, probably lying about how everything would be fine, probably carrying a weight that should have broken him, but somehow hadn't. And somewhere in this building, in the systems and structures Victoria had built to maximize efficiency, there was a rot she'd never noticed before, a culture that punished people for being human, that measured worth only in output. That had turned her into exactly the kind of leader her father had been, powerful, feared, and completely alone. Victoria pressed her hand against the cold glass and made a decision that terrified her more than any business risk she'd ever taken. She was going to do something that would probably cost her everything. She was going to make things right. The morning after being fired, Ethan woke at 4:30 a.m. to the sound of his alarm, the same time he'd been waking for 3 years. His body moved on autopilot, brain still foggy with exhaustion, before reality crashed down on him. He didn't have a job to go to. Ethan lay on the couch in the darkness, staring at the ceiling while his heart hammered against his ribs. The panic he'd held at bay last night came flooding back with brutal force. Rent was due in 2 weeks. Lily's physical therapy wasn't covered entirely by insurance. Their savings account had maybe 6 weeks of breathing room if he was careful. 6 weeks to find a new job, pass the interviews, wait for the first paycheck. It wasn't enough time. His phone buzzed on the coffee table. Ethan grabbed it, hoping irrationally that it might be the company calling to say there'd been a mistake. Instead, it was an automated email from HR with the subject line, Cobra benefits information and termination details. He deleted it without reading and forced himself to sit up. Falling apart wasn't an option. Lily would be awake in 2 hours, expecting breakfast and normalcy, and a father who had his life together enough to help her brush her teeth and pack her lunch. Ethan stood and moved quietly to the kitchen. The familiar routine steadied him: coffee brewing, eggs scrambling, bread toasting. By the time golden light started filtering through the window, he'd made breakfast and pulled out his laptop to start updating his resume. The screen glowed in the pre-dawn dimness. Ethan stared at the cursor blinking in the empty job search bar and felt the weight of impossible choices settling on his shoulders. Apply broadly and risk taking something that paid less? Focus on positions similar to what he'd lost and compete with hundreds of other candidates? Lie about why he'd left his last job? Daddy? Ethan turned to find Lily standing in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. She was wearing her favorite pajamas, the ones with planets and stars that were getting too small, but she refused to give up. "Morning, sweetheart," he said, closing the laptop quickly. "You're up early. I heard you moving around." Lily patted over and climbed into his lap without asking. She was getting too big for this, all long limbs and sharp elbows, but Ethan wrapped his arms around her anyway. "Are you looking for a new job already?" "Just getting started," Ethan said carefully. "But right now, I'm making you breakfast. Scrambled eggs sound good?" Lily nodded against his chest. They sat like that for a moment, quiet in the early morning stillness. Then she pulled back to look at him with those serious eyes that were too old for 6. "Daddy, if you don't find a job fast, will we have to move again?" The question punched the air from his lungs. "What makes you think that?" "I heard Mrs. Chen telling Mr. Rodriguez that rent is really expensive here." Lily's voice was small. "And I know my hospital stuff cost a lot of money. I saw the papers on the table." Ethan cursed himself for not being more careful, for not hiding the medical bills better, for not protecting her from adult worries she shouldn't have to carry. "Listen to me," he said firmly, tilting her chin up so she had to meet his eyes. "You don't need to worry about money. That's my job. Your job is to be 6 years old and do your homework and play with your friends, okay?" "But, Lily." Ethan's voice was gentle but absolute. "I promised you when Mommy died that I would always take care of you. That promise doesn't change because I lost one job. I will find another one. We will be okay. Do you believe me?" Lily studied his face for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. "I believe you." "Good." Ethan kissed her forehead and stood, carrying her to the kitchen counter. "Now, how about those eggs? And I think there might be some strawberries left from yesterday." Lily's face brightened. "Can I help cook?" "Always." They moved through the morning routine together, Lily cracking eggs with intense concentration, Ethan guiding her hands, both of them pretending that everything was normal. By the time he walked her to school an hour later, she was chattering about a science project and had apparently forgotten the worried questions from earlier. Ethan watched her run into the building, backpack bouncing, and felt his chest tighten. She'd survived losing her mother. She'd survived the hospital. She'd survived every hard thing with resilience that amazed him, but she shouldn't have to survive him failing her, too. He turned toward the subway, planning to head to the library to job hunt properly, when his phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello? Mr. Cole?" The voice was crisp, professional, female. "This is Sandra from Langford Technologies HR. Do you have a moment to speak?" Ethan's heart stuttered. Yes. What's this about?" Ms. Langford would like to meet with you this morning. Are you available at 10 a.m.? Confusion crashed into hope, crashed into suspicion. "I was terminated yesterday. Why would she want to meet?" There was a slight pause. "I'm not at liberty to discuss the details, Mr. Cole, But Ms. Langford was very clear that she needs to speak with you in person. Will 10 o'clock work? Ethan looked down at his worn jeans and old jacket, the clothes he'd thrown on for school drop-off, nothing appropriate for facing the woman who'd fired him less than 24 hours ago. I can be there, he heard himself say. Excellent. I'll have your visitor credentials ready at the front desk. The line went dead. Ethan stood on the sidewalk, commuters flowing around him, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Was this about the severance paperwork? Some legal detail they needed to resolve? Or, his heart beat faster, was there a chance they'd reconsidered? No, that was impossible. Victoria Langford didn't reconsider. She didn't second guess. She'd looked at him yesterday with the emotional depth of a machine and ended his career without hesitation. But she wanted to see him. Ethan checked the time. He had 90 minutes to get home, change into something presentable, and make it back to Manhattan. He started walking faster, hope and dread warring in his chest. Whatever Victoria Langford wanted, he had to be ready for it. It might be his only chance to salvage something from the wreckage of yesterday. Victoria arrived at her office at 6 a.m., which was late by her standards. She'd spent most of the night lying awake, staring at her ceiling, rehearsing what she would say to Ethan Cole. The words never sounded right. Now she sat at her desk with coffee she wasn't drinking, watching the sunrise paint Manhattan in shades of gold and amber. The city was waking up, delivery trucks rumbling through streets, early commuters filling subway platforms, lights flickering on in office buildings as the machinery of commerce ground back to life. From up here, it all looked orderly, manageable. Nothing like the chaos currently tearing through Victoria's carefully constructed worldview. Her computer screen showed the email she'd sent at 2 a.m. to the board of directors. Review of recent termination decision. Request for emergency meeting. She'd laid out everything she'd discovered about Ethan Cole. The gap between his potential and his recent performance. The medical circumstances. The failure of middle management to provide adequate support. The troubling pattern in Richard Brennan's department. And then she'd done something that would have been unthinkable 48 hours ago. She'd admitted she'd made a mistake. The responses had started arriving at 5 a.m. Some were supportive, some were concerned. Robert Halloway, the board member who'd been pushing for more aggressive efficiency measures, had sent a terse message. We need to discuss your judgment on this matter. Reversing termination sets a dangerous precedent. Victoria had read it twice and then archived it without responding. Her door opened without a knock. Only one person in the building had that privilege. You look terrible, said Margaret Chen, Victoria's executive assistant for the past 15 years. She was 62, brutally honest, and the only person Victoria trusted completely. When did you last sleep? I'm not sure that's relevant. It's relevant when you're about to do something that could cost you everything you've built. Margaret closed the door and sat down without being invited. I read your email to the board. Are you absolutely certain about this? Victoria met her assistant's eyes. No. But I'm certain that firing Ethan Cole was wrong, and I'm certain that if I don't try to fix it, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. Regret? Margaret repeated softly. I don't think I've ever heard you use that word before. I've never felt it before. Victoria turned back to the window. Not like this. Silence stretched between them. Then Margaret said quietly, He reminded you of someone, didn't he? The way he stood there yesterday, the way he didn't beg or break. Victoria's jaw tightened. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. Margaret's voice was gentle but implacable. Your father used to tell you that strength meant standing alone, that showing weakness was the same as admitting defeat. You've built your entire life around that belief. My father built an empire on that belief, Victoria said sharply, and died alone in a hospital room with only you beside him. Margaret stood and walked to the window, standing shoulder to shoulder with Victoria. I was there, remember? I saw his face when you told him the company was thriving. He didn't look proud, he looked sad. Victoria's throat tightened. He told me I'd become strong enough to stand alone. Those were his last words. Exactly. Margaret's reflection in the glass showed infinite compassion. And you've been standing alone ever since, convinced it was what he wanted. But Victoria, what if he was trying to warn you? What if he spent his last breath telling you not to make his mistakes? The words hit like a physical blow. Victoria's hands curled into fists at her sides. Ethan Cole has a daughter who believes in him, Margaret continued quietly. He's exhausted and struggling and probably terrified. But he didn't break yesterday. He didn't compromise his dignity or his love for that little girl. He just asked you not to take away the one thing that mattered to him, her faith that he's still trying. I know, Victoria whispered, and now you want to give him his job back, not because it's good business, though it might be, not because it will look good, though it might do that too. You want to give it back because seeing him stand there with nothing left but his love for his daughter showed you something you've been trying not to see for a very long time. Victoria closed her eyes. What's that? That strength isn't standing alone. It's standing up for someone else when you have everything to lose. The truth of it settled into Victoria's bones. She thought about her father, brilliant and ruthless and dead at 62 with no friends at his funeral. She thought about her ex-husband David, who'd begged her to let him in before finally giving up. She thought about every relationship she'd sacrificed, every moment of connection she'd dismissed as weakness. She thought about standing in this office for the rest of her life, powerful and respected and completely hollow inside. He'll be here at 10, Victoria said finally. I don't know what I'm going to say to him. Start with the truth, Margaret suggested. Start with, I made a mistake. Everything else will follow. And if the board demands I step down for reversing a termination? Margaret smiled slightly. Then you'll finally learn what your father was trying to teach you at the end, that some things are more important than power. She left before Victoria could respond. Victoria stood alone at the window, watching the city wake up, and wondered if she had the courage to destroy everything she'd built in order to become someone worth being. In 3 hours, she would find out. Ethan stood in the lobby at 9:55 a.m., visitor badge clipped to his jacket, trying not to feel like a man approaching his own execution. He'd changed into his interview suit, the one he'd bought secondhand 3 years ago for this exact job. It was clean and pressed, but obviously old, the fabric shiny at the elbows, the cut slightly out of style. His shoes were polished but worn. His tie was knotted carefully but fraying at the edges. Everything about him screamed, trying too hard to hide that he's barely holding on. The elevator ride to the 60th floor felt surreal. Yesterday he'd taken this same journey flanked by security guards, carrying his professional life in a cardboard box. Today he was alone, ascending toward a meeting he didn't understand. The doors opened onto the executive floor. Thick carpet, expensive art, floor-to-ceiling windows offering views that most people would never see. A receptionist he didn't recognize smiled professionally. Mr. Cole? Ms. Langford is expecting you, conference room A, just down the hall. Not her office, a conference room. That felt significant, but Ethan couldn't parse what it meant. He walked slowly, his heartbeat loud in his ears. Through an open door, he glimpsed the same room where he'd been fired yesterday. The table was empty now, morning sunlight streaming through the windows, no witnesses to whatever was about to happen. He knocked on the door to conference room A. Come in. Ethan pushed open the door and stopped. Victoria Langford stood by the window, backlit by morning sun. She was dressed immaculately as always, navy suit, pearl earrings, hair pulled back. But there was something different about her expression, something that looked almost like uncertainty. Mr. Cole, she said, thank you for coming. I wasn't sure I had a choice, Ethan replied, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice. Victoria's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but something softer than the ice he'd seen yesterday. You always have a choice. Please, sit. Ethan sat at the conference table. Victoria took the seat across from him rather than at the head, another detail that felt meaningful. For a long moment she just looked at him, and Ethan had the uncomfortable sensation of being truly seen for the first time since entering this building 3 years ago. I owe you an apology, Victoria said, finally. The words were so unexpected that Ethan wasn't sure he'd heard correctly. I'm sorry? I made a mistake yesterday. Victoria's voice was controlled, but there was something raw underneath it. I fired you based on incomplete information and without proper consideration of your circumstances. That was wrong. Ethan's mind raced. Is this about a lawsuit? Because this isn't about protecting the company from legal action. Victoria cut him off, but gently. This is about the fact that I looked at your performance data and saw numbers instead of a human being. I saw declining productivity and missed deadlines without asking why. I accepted your supervisor's recommendation without questioning whether his judgment might be flawed. She pulled a folder from beside her and slid it across the table. Ethan opened it to find his own employment file: performance reviews, project reports, medical claims. I spent last night reviewing everything about your time here, Victoria continued. 3 years ago, you came to us with exceptional recommendations and a personal tragedy you never mentioned in your interview. You worked brilliantly for 2.5 years. Then your daughter had a medical emergency and your performance declined. Not because you became incompetent, but because you were trying to be two parents on one salary while she recovered. Ethan's throat tightened. How did you? I cross-referenced your medical claims with your performance timeline. Victoria's eyes were steady on his. I found the hospital records, the physical therapy appointments, the security reports about you sleeping in your office. I found a picture of someone slowly drowning who never once asked for help. I didn't want special treatment, Ethan said quietly. No, you wanted to keep your job and take care of your daughter and somehow do both perfectly, even though that was impossible. Victoria's voice softened. You wanted what every parent wants, to give your child stability and security. And instead of supporting you, this company's systems punished you for being human. Ethan stared at the folder, emotion churning in his chest. Why are you telling me this? Because I want to offer you your job back. The world seemed to tilt. Ethan looked up sharply. What? I want to reinstate you, effective immediately. Victoria's posture was perfect, but her hands were clasped tightly on the table. With back pay for the day you missed, full benefits restored, and a formal apology on record for wrongful termination. I don't understand. Ethan's voice came out hoarse. Yesterday you fired me without hesitation. Today you're apologizing and offering everything back. What changed? Victoria was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight that made Ethan's chest ache. You did. Or rather, what you said did. She met his eyes fully. You asked me not to tell your daughter you'd failed. You stood there with your entire career crumbling, and the only thing you cared about was protecting her faith in you. She paused, something flickering across her face. That showed me something I haven't seen in a very long time. Real strength. The kind that has nothing to do with power or control. I was just trying to keep her from being hurt, Ethan said. Exactly. Victoria's smile was sad. I've spent my entire life believing that strength meant standing alone, that showing weakness was the same as admitting defeat. But watching you yesterday, I realized I've been wrong about everything that matters. You weren't weak because you were struggling. You were strong because you kept trying anyway. Ethan felt tears prickling behind his eyes. He blinked them back furiously. Ms. Langford. Victoria, she interrupted gently. If we're going to work together again, I'd prefer you call me Victoria. Victoria. The name felt strange on his tongue. I appreciate this more than you know, but I need to understand what this really is. Are you offering me my job back because you genuinely believe it's right, or because you feel guilty? The question hung between them. Victoria didn't flinch from it. Both, she said honestly. I feel guilty because I made a decision that hurt you and your daughter without taking the time to understand your situation. But I'm offering you this job back because after reviewing your work, I believe you're exactly the kind of employee this company should be fighting to keep. You're brilliant, dedicated, and you make everyone around you better. Those qualities don't disappear because you had 6 difficult months. She leaned forward slightly. I'm also offering you this because I want to fix something that's broken in how this company operates. You're not the first talented person we've lost because middle management confused struggling with failing, but I'm hoping you'll be the last, and that starts with admitting when I've made a mistake. Ethan studied her face, the careful control beginning to crack around the edges, the genuine regret in her eyes, the vulnerability of someone who clearly wasn't used to apologizing. What about Richard? He asked. My supervisor, the one who recommended my termination. Victoria's expression hardened. Mr. Brennan will be undergoing a performance review. I've discovered some troubling patterns in how he manages his team. Regardless of the outcome, you won't be reporting to him anymore." "Who would I report to?" "Directly to the research division head, Dr. Sarah Okonkwo. She's brilliant, fair, and actually cares about developing talent rather than punishing people for having lives outside work." Ethan absorbed this. It was everything he could have hoped for: his job back, better management, a chance to prove himself again. But something nagged at him. "What about the board?" he asked quietly. "What about the other executives who'll see this as you showing weakness?" Victoria's smile turned sharp. "Let me worry about the board. That's my job. Your job is to decide whether you can trust me enough to come back." And there it was, the real question underneath everything else. Could he trust the woman who'd fired him yesterday? Could he believe this transformation was real and not just temporary guilt that would evaporate the next time he had a rough quarter? Could he risk his daughter's security on the hope that Victoria Langford had genuinely changed? Ethan thought about Lily's face this morning, asking if they'd have to move. About the medical bills stacked on his kitchen counter. About the 6 weeks of savings that stood between them and disaster. He thought about his resume sitting half-finished on his laptop. About the job market and competition and the reality that finding something comparable could take months. But he also thought about Victoria's eyes when she'd said real strength. About the genuine regret in her voice. About the risk she was taking to admit she'd been wrong. "I have conditions," Ethan heard himself say. Victoria raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "If Lily has another medical emergency, I need flexibility. I need to know I won't be punished for being a parent first and an employee second." "Agreed. I'll have HR draft a formal, flexible work arrangement. I need to leave by 5:30 every day to pick her up from school. No exceptions." "Agreed. Your work speaks for itself. I don't care about FaceTime." Ethan took a breath. "And I need you to promise that if my performance starts declining again, you'll talk to me before making decisions. That you'll treat me like a human being instead of a data point." Victoria's expression softened. "I promise. And Ethan, that promise extends to everyone in this company, not just you. What happened to you is going to be a catalyst for real change here. I'm going to make sure of it." Ethan searched her face and found only sincerity. It terrified him how much he wanted to believe her. "Okay," he said quietly. "I'll come back." Relief flooded Victoria's features, genuine, unguarded emotion that transformed her from Ice Queen to something startlingly human. "Thank you, She stopped, seeming to struggle for words. "Thank you for giving me a chance to make this right." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Victoria stood and extended her hand across the table. Ethan stood and shook it, her grip firm and warm. "Welcome back, Ethan," Victoria said. "Your office is exactly as you left it." "I didn't have an office, I had a cubicle." Victoria's smile was small but real. "You have an office now. Dr. Okonkwo is expecting you at 11 to discuss your transition back. Take the rest of today to get settled. We'll talk more tomorrow about your project assignments." Ethan nodded, still processing the surreal turn his life had taken in the past 12 hours. Fired yesterday, rehired today, given an office and a new supervisor and promises of flexibility. It felt too good to be true. But looking at Victoria's face, at the cracks forming in armor she'd worn for decades, Ethan thought maybe, just maybe, it might be real. "One more thing," Victoria said as he turned to leave. "Your daughter, Lily. You don't have to hide her anymore. Bring her to work if you need to. Let people know you're a father. That's nothing to be ashamed of." Ethan's throat tightened. "Thank you," he managed. He left the conference room feeling like he'd stepped through a mirror into a different version of his life. The elevator ride down to his new office passed in a daze. When he finally sat down at an actual desk with actual walls and an actual door, he pulled out his phone with shaking hands. The text to Mrs. Chen was simple. "I got my job back. Can you tell Lily when she gets home from school? Tell her Daddy's still trying." The response came 30 seconds later. "Oh, thank God. I'm crying happy tears. That little girl is going to be over the moon." "So proud of you, Ethan." Ethan set down the phone and let himself feel it. The relief, the gratitude, the fragile hope that maybe things could actually get better. On the 60th floor, Victoria stood at her window watching the city and wondering if she'd just taken the first step toward redemption or the last step before losing everything. Either way, there was no going back now. The news spread through Langford Technologies like wildfire. By noon, everyone knew that Victoria Langford had reversed a termination. By 1 p.m., the rumors had multiplied. Some said Ethan Cole had threatened a lawsuit. Others whispered about discrimination claims. A few suggested he had dirt on the company. The truth was somehow more shocking than any speculation. Their CEO had simply admitted she was wrong. Ethan felt the stares as he walked through the building to meet Dr. Okonkwo. Conversation stopped when he passed. People looked at him with curiosity, suspicion, and something that might have been hope. He kept his head down and focused on putting one foot in front of the other. Dr. Sarah Okonkwo's office was on the 52nd floor, tucked into a corner with windows overlooking the East River. She was in her late 40s, her dark skin luminous, her hair wrapped in vibrant fabric that somehow looked both professional and defiant. When Ethan knocked, she looked up from her computer and smiled with genuine warmth. "Ethan Cole, come in, come in." She stood and shook his hand with a grip that was firm without being aggressive. "I've been looking forward to this meeting ever since Victoria called me at 7 this morning. I'm sorry if this created problems for you," Ethan said carefully. Sarah laughed, a rich, full sound that filled the office. "Problems? This is the most interesting thing that's happened here in 5 years. Sit, please." Ethan sat in the chair across from her desk. Unlike the sterile executive offices upstairs, Sarah's space was cluttered with life. Books stacked on every surface, plants on the windowsill, children's drawings pinned to a corkboard behind her desk. "Those are from my grandkids," Sarah said, following his gaze. 4 of them, all under 8. Absolute terrors. Best thing that ever happened to me. The casual mention of family in a professional space felt revolutionary after 3 years of hiding Lily's existence like a shameful secret. "Victoria said you have a daughter," Sarah continued, settling back into her chair. 6 years old? "Yes, Lily." Ethan's voice softened automatically at her name. "Bring her by sometime. I keep candy in my desk specifically for visiting children. Drives the accountants crazy." Sarah's smile was conspiratorial. "Now, let's talk about your work. I've reviewed your entire portfolio from the last 3 years, and I have to say, you're wasted in basic research assignments." Ethan blinked. "I'm sorry?" "Your early projects showed real innovation. The algorithm you developed for predictive modeling? Brilliant. The interface redesign that improved user efficiency by 30%? Should have won awards. But then Brennan started giving you grunt work, data analysis, report formatting, the kind of assignments we should be outsourcing." Sarah leaned forward. "Want to know why?" "Because my performance declined," Ethan said automatically. "Wrong. Because you made him look bad." Sarah pulled up a file on her computer and turned the screen so Ethan could see. "This is the project evaluation from 18 months ago. You proposed a complete overhaul of our client management system. The projected efficiency gains were enormous. Brennan took your proposal, watered it down, presented it to the board as his own idea, and when it underperformed, blamed you for the initial concept being flawed." Ethan stared at the documents, anger rising in his chest. "I didn't know." "Of course you didn't. Brennan's very good at covering his tracks. But I've been watching his department for years, and I've seen the pattern. Every time someone talented threatens his position, he either takes credit for their work or buries them in meaningless tasks until they quit or get fired." Sarah's expression hardened. "Victoria's review of his management practices is long overdue, but that's not your concern anymore. You're with me now, and I don't tolerate that kind of garbage." "What exactly would I be doing?" Ethan asked. "Leading, innovating, actually using that brain of yours." Sarah pulled up another file. "I have 3 major projects that need someone with your skill set. One is developing AI integration for our research platforms. Another is creating a new data visualization system for client presentations. The third is confidential but involves predictive analytics for market trends. All of them are high visibility, high impact work. Interested?" Ethan's mind raced. These were the kinds of projects he dreamed about when he first joined the company, the kind of work that could actually advance his career instead of just paying the bills. Yes, absolutely. Good. Because here's how I work. I give you the resources and autonomy you need, and I expect results. I don't care if you work from home when your daughter is sick. I don't care if you leave early for school pickup. I care that the work gets done and it's excellent. Can you handle that? I can, Ethan said, feeling something unfamiliar blooming in his chest. It took him a moment to recognize it as hope. Then we're going to do great things together. Sarah stood and extended her hand again. Welcome to the team, Ethan. The real team, not whatever Brennan was running. Now go home, spend time with your daughter, and come back Monday ready to change some things around here. Ethan shook her hand, overwhelmed. Thank you, Dr. Okonkwo. Sarah, we're colleagues now. She walked him to the door. And Ethan, what Victoria did today took courage. A lot of people in this building are going to resist the changes she's trying to make. But some of us have been waiting for someone to finally challenge how things work around here. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for being the catalyst. Ethan nodded, not trusting his voice. He left her office feeling like he'd stepped into an alternate reality where people actually cared about employees as humans instead of resources to be exploited. The elevator ride down passed in a daze. As the doors opened on the ground floor, Ethan's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Victoria. I wanted to check in. How did the meeting with Sarah go? Ethan stared at the message. The CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company was personally texting him to see how he was doing. He typed back carefully. Very well. She's incredible. Thank you for this opportunity. The response came immediately. You earned it. Now go home to your daughter. That's an order from your boss. Ethan smiled despite himself and headed for the subway, his heart lighter than it had been in months. He had no idea that across town, the backlash against Victoria's decision was already beginning. The emergency board meeting convened at 3 p.m. in the executive conference room where Ethan had been fired 2 days earlier. Victoria sat at the head of the table, perfectly composed, while 8 board members arranged themselves with varying degrees of hostility. Robert Halloway sat directly across from her, his expression carved from stone. Margaret had tried to warn her that this was coming. Victoria had told her to schedule it anyway. Let's get right to it, Robert said without preamble. Victoria, what the hell were you thinking? I was thinking that I made a mistake and needed to correct it, Victoria replied calmly. By reversing a legal documented termination, by undermining our entire HR process, by making it look like any employee can get their job back if they tell a sad enough story. Robert's voice rose with each question. Do you have any idea what kind of precedent this sets? I'm aware of the implications, Victoria said. I'm also aware that our termination process failed in this case. Ethan Cole was fired because of systemic failures in middle management, not because he was actually underperforming. His productivity dropped 30% over 6 months, Robert shot back. Those are facts, not feelings. His productivity dropped because his 6-year-old daughter had a medical emergency and he was trying to be a single parent while working full-time on a salary that barely covered their expenses. Victoria's voice remained steady, but something sharp entered it. Context matters, Robert. Numbers without context are just noise. We're not a charity, said Patricia Morrison, another board member who'd built her career on efficiency metrics. We can't keep every employee who has personal problems. I'm not suggesting we keep every struggling employee, Victoria replied. I'm suggesting we support talented employees through temporary difficulties instead of immediately discarding them. Ethan Cole's early work was exceptional. With proper management and flexibility, he could return to that level. Instead, we lost him because we confused struggling with failing. And now we have him back, along with a reputation for flip-flopping on major decisions, Robert said. How many other terminated employees are going to demand reinstatement? How many lawsuits are we going to face from people claiming we didn't give them the same consideration? Victoria had anticipated this argument. She pulled up a presentation on the screen behind her. I spent yesterday analyzing our termination patterns over the last 5 years. What I found was disturbing. The screen filled with data, charts, graphs, statistical analyses. The board members leaned forward despite themselves. We've lost 43 high-performing employees in the past 5 years, Victoria continued. All of them were terminated after performance declines that lasted less than a year. When I cross-referenced their medical claims and life circumstances, I found that 37 of them were dealing with major life events, medical issues, family deaths, divorces, elder care responsibilities. She clicked to the next slide. Of those 37, 31 were working under supervisors with high turnover rates and multiple complaints about lack of support. The pattern is clear. We're not losing people because they're incompetent. We're losing them because our management culture punishes people for being human. So your solution is to bring them all back? Patricia asked skeptically. My solution is to fix the culture that created the problem in the first place, Victoria said. Starting with mandatory management training on supporting employees through difficult periods, implementing formal, flexible work policies, and yes, reviewing recent terminations to identify other cases where we might have made mistakes. The room erupted in protests. Victoria waited for them to exhaust themselves, her expression unchanging. When silence finally returned, she spoke quietly but with absolute authority. I built this company alongside my father. I've spent 20 years making hard decisions and prioritizing efficiency over everything else. And you know what that's gotten us? A reputation for being a brutal place to work. High turnover. Difficulty attracting top talent. A culture where people hide their struggles until they collapse. She stood, planting her hands on the table. Ethan Cole asked me not to tell his 6-year-old daughter that he'd failed. He didn't beg for his job. He didn't threaten litigation. He just asked me to protect his child's faith in him. And I realized in that moment that I'd become exactly like my father, so focused on strength through isolation that I'd forgotten what real strength looks like. This is sentimental nonsense, Robert interjected. Your father built this company on discipline and high standards. My father died alone, Victoria said quietly. The words landed like bombs. He had no friends at his funeral. His own wife had left him years earlier. He spent his last breath telling me I was strong enough to stand alone, and I finally realized he wasn't celebrating. He was warning me not to make his mistakes. The room went silent. I'm not asking for your permission to fix what's broken here, Victoria continued. I'm informing you that changes are coming. We're going to become a company that values people as much as profits, that supports employees through difficulties instead of discarding them, that measures success not just in quarterly earnings, but in the lives we improve and the loyalty we earn. And if we disagree, Robert asked coldly, then you're welcome to call for a vote of no confidence, Victoria said. But before you do, I suggest you look at the employee satisfaction surveys I've commissioned over the past 2 days. Look at the exit interviews from talented people we've lost. Look at the recruitment data showing how hard it's becoming to attract top talent because of our reputation. She clicked to another slide showing preliminary survey results. The numbers were damning. Low morale, high stress, widespread feeling that the company didn't care about employees as people. We're hemorrhaging talent and goodwill, Victoria said. And if we don't change, we're going to lose our competitive edge to companies that understand that taking care of people is good business. This isn't sentiment, it's strategy. Patricia was studying the data with a frown. These numbers are concerning, but Victoria, you have to understand how this looks. Reversing a termination 48 hours after making it seems impulsive. It wasn't impulsive, it was necessary. Victoria's voice softened slightly. I made a mistake, a serious one, and I'm using my authority as CEO to correct it and prevent similar mistakes going forward. Isn't that what leadership is supposed to look like? The board members exchanged glances. Robert still looked hostile, but some of the others were wavering. Finally, Patricia spoke. I want to see a detailed plan for these cultural changes. Budget projections, expected outcomes, and I want regular updates on how this affects our retention and recruitment metrics. You'll have all of that by Monday, Victoria promised. And I want Ethan Cole's performance monitored closely, Robert added. If this backfires, if he can't deliver, I expect you to admit this was a mistake. If he can't deliver, I'll admit it, Victoria agreed, but I don't think that's going to happen. The meeting adjourned with no vote of no confidence, but the tension was palpable. Victoria knew she'd won the battle, but not the war. Some board members would be watching for any excuse to prove her wrong. As everyone filed out, Margaret appeared at her elbow. That was risky. Everything worth doing is risky, Victoria said quietly. Your father would have been proud. Victoria turned to look at her assistant. Would he? Margaret's smile was sad. The man he was at the end? The one who realized too late what he'd sacrificed? Yes, I think he would have been very proud. Victoria nodded, not trusting her voice. She returned to her office and found herself staring at the photo on her desk, the only personal item in the entire space. It showed her father in his prime, standing in front of the original company building, looking fierce and determined and utterly alone. She'd spent her entire life trying to become him. Maybe it was time to become something better. Lily was drawing at the kitchen table when Ethan got home at 4 p.m., hours earlier than his usual arrival time. She looked up in shock. "Daddy, you're home." "I'm home," Ethan confirmed, sweeping her up into a hug. "And I have good news." Mrs. Chen had clearly prepared her because Lily squealed, "You got your job back." "I did, and I got promoted." Ethan set her down and knelt to her level. "Remember how I said sometimes when one thing ends, something better can start? This is one of those times." Lily threw her arms around his neck. "I knew you could do it. I told all my friends you were the best worker, and you'd prove it." The absolute faith in her voice made Ethan's chest ache. "You never stopped believing in me, did you?" "Never ever," Lily said seriously. "Because you're my daddy, and you always try your hardest." Ethan held her close, feeling the weight of the past 2 days finally lifting. He'd been fired, rehired, given new opportunities, and watched his CEO risk everything to admit she'd been wrong. But none of it would have mattered if he'd lost this, Lily's unshakable belief that he was worthy of her faith. "How about we celebrate?" he suggested. "Ice cream for dinner?" Lily's eyes went wide. "Really? But you always say ice cream isn't dinner." "Tonight it is," Ethan declared. "Special occasions require special rules." They walked to the ice cream shop 2 blocks away, Lily chattering about her day at school, while Ethan listened and felt something like peace settling over him. The evening was warm, the city bustling with end-of-week energy. People rushed past them toward subway stations and bus stops, everyone focused on their own lives and struggles. But for this moment, Ethan let himself simply be a father with his daughter, eating ice cream and laughing at her stories, not thinking about work or money or all the ways things could still go wrong. They were sitting on a bench watching the sunset when Lily asked, "Daddy, what made your boss change her mind?" Ethan considered how to explain it in terms a 6-year-old would understand. "I think she realized that sometimes people need help instead of punishment, that being kind can be stronger than being mean. Like when I helped Jamie at school even though he was mean to me before?" Lily asked. "Exactly like that. You chose to see the best in him instead of just remembering when he was mean." Lily nodded thoughtfully. "My teacher says that's called giving second chances." "Your teacher is very smart." "Does that mean your boss is giving you a second chance?" "I think maybe we're giving each other second chances," Ethan said quietly. They sat together as the sky turned from gold to pink to deep purple. Ethan's phone buzzed with an email. His official reinstatement paperwork, benefits confirmation, new project assignments from Sarah. His new life, documented and real. But the real proof was sitting beside him, chocolate ice cream on her chin, absolute trust in her eyes. "I love you, Lily," Ethan said suddenly. She looked up at him and smiled. "I love you too, Daddy. Even when you lose your job and get sad, I still love you." "Even then?" "Especially then," Lily said with the wisdom that children sometimes possess. "Because that's when you need it most." Ethan pulled her close and let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, things were actually going to be okay. He had no idea that in 3 days, everything would nearly fall apart again. Monday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth and building tension. Victoria got to her office at 5 a.m. to find her inbox flooded with messages. Some were congratulatory, employees thanking her for standing up for one of their own. Others were hostile, people accusing her of favoritism, weakness, and destroying company morale. But the most concerning message was from an unknown sender with the subject line, "You made a mistake." The email was brief and brutal. "Ms. Langford, reversing Ethan Cole's termination might feel noble, but you've opened a door you won't be able to close. People are already talking. Some see weakness, others see opportunity. You've built this company on discipline and high standards. Don't destroy it with sentimentality. This will end badly for both of you. No signature, no identifying information, just a threat disguised as concern. Victoria deleted it and tried to focus on the week ahead. She had meetings with HR about new flexible work policies, sessions with department heads about improving management culture, a presentation to the board about long-term strategy, and she had a company watching to see if she'd really changed, or if this was just a temporary aberration. The morning passed in a blur of meetings and decisions. At 11 a.m., Victoria was reviewing budget projections when Margaret knocked urgently on her door. "Turn on the news," her assistant said, her face pale. "Channel 7, now." Victoria grabbed the remote and switched on the television mounted on her wall. The business news segment was in progress, showing footage of the Langford Technologies building. Controversy surrounding CEO Victoria Langford's unprecedented decision to reverse an employee termination, the anchor was saying. Sources inside the company say the move has created significant internal conflict and raised questions about Langford's leadership judgment. The screen cut to an interview with someone Victoria recognized with a sinking stomach. Richard Brennan, Ethan's former supervisor. "Look, I respect Ms. Langford," Brennan said with practiced sincerity. "But this situation sets a concerning precedent. Ethan Cole was terminated for legitimate performance reasons after multiple warnings. Bringing him back undermines the entire management structure and sends a message that standards don't matter." "Are you saying Ms. Langford made the wrong call?" the reporter pressed. "I'm saying that emotions sometimes cloud judgment," Brennan replied smoothly. "And in business, that can be dangerous for everyone involved." Victoria felt rage building in her chest. Brennan had gone to the media. He'd violated company policy and confidentiality agreements to publicly undermine her decision. He just made a fatal mistake. Margaret was already on her phone. "I'm getting legal on this immediately. He can't—" "Wait," Victoria interrupted. "Victoria, an idea was forming. Let him dig his own grave. Schedule a press conference for this afternoon. I'm going to address this head on." "Victoria, are you sure? Going public could escalate." "It's already escalated," Victoria said grimly. "Now I'm going to control the narrative." She spent the next 3 hours preparing, making calls, pulling together data. By 2 p.m., she was ready. The press conference was held in the building's main lobby. Cameras from major business networks crowded the space. Reporters fired questions before Victoria even reached the podium. She raised her hand for silence and waited until the room settled. "Thank you for coming," she began, her voice clear and controlled. "I'm here to address the recent controversy surrounding my decision to reinstate Ethan Cole and to clarify what this decision means for Langford Technologies going forward." Flashes popped as cameras captured every word. "2 weeks ago, I made a decision to terminate an employee based on performance metrics without fully investigating the circumstances behind those metrics. That was wrong. When I discovered my mistake, I corrected it. This isn't about emotion or favoritism. It's about accountability and doing the right thing." She clicked to her first slide, showing Ethan's performance trajectory. Ethan Cole was an exemplary employee for 2.5 years before personal circumstances impacted his work. Rather than offering support, our systems punished him for being human. This revealed flaws in our corporate culture that I'm committed to fixing. A reporter called out, "But don't you worry this makes you look weak?" Victoria's smile was sharp. "I worry that people think admitting mistakes is weakness. Real weakness is being so afraid of appearing fallible that you double down on bad decisions. I'd rather be a leader who learns and grows than one who's right all the time and wrong about what matters." "What about the precedent?" another reporter asked. "Will every terminated employee now demand reinstatement?" "Every terminated employee has always had the right to appeal their termination," Victoria replied. "What's changing is that we're going to have better processes to prevent unjust terminations in the first place. We're implementing comprehensive management training, formal, flexible work policies, and regular reviews of our practices to ensure we're supporting our employees effectively." She paused, then added, "And we're going to hold managers accountable when they fail to provide that support." Which brings me to my next announcement. Victoria clicked to a new slide showing internal investigation results. An investigation into management practices in our research division has revealed significant issues with how one supervisor handled multiple employees. As a result, Richard Brennan has been placed on administrative leave pending a formal review. His public statements today violated company confidentiality policies and demonstrated exactly the kind of judgment failure we can't tolerate. The room erupted with questions. Victoria answered them all with calm precision, never wavering, never showing doubt. She presented data on employee retention, satisfaction surveys, and projected outcomes of the cultural changes she was implementing. By the time the press conference ended 45 minutes later, the narrative had shifted. Victoria wasn't weak. She was brave enough to admit mistakes and strong enough to fix them. But she knew the real test was still coming. As she left the lobby, her phone rang. Ethan's name appeared on the screen. "I saw the press conference," he said when she answered. His voice was tight. "Victoria, I never wanted to be the center of a media storm. I never wanted to cause problems for you." "You didn't cause anything," Victoria said firmly. "Brennan did by going to the press. And I made this decision knowing exactly what it might cost. Don't second guess it now. People are going to blame me if this hurts the company. Let me worry about the company. You worry about doing the brilliant work I know you're capable of." Victoria softened her tone. "Ethan, we're in this together now. That means when things get hard, we support each other. Can you do that?" A long pause. Then quietly, "Yes, I can do that." "Good. Now go home to your daughter and don't watch the news. I'll handle the fallout." She ended the call and looked up to find Margaret watching her with an expression that was part concern, part pride. "You really care about him," Margaret observed. "I care about doing the right thing," Victoria corrected. "Those aren't mutually exclusive." Victoria didn't respond. She returned to her office and prepared for whatever came next, knowing that she'd crossed a line she could never uncross. She'd gone from untouchable CEO to the woman who'd risked everything for one employee's second chance. The question was whether that risk would destroy her or save her, and the answer would arrive sooner than she expected. The backlash came exactly 3 days after the press conference. Ethan was working late on Thursday evening, deep into coding for the AI integration project Sarah had assigned him, when his phone lit up with a message from an unknown number. He almost ignored it, but something made him check. The image that filled his screen made his blood run cold. It was a photo of him and Lily from that morning, walking to school, her hand in his, both of them laughing at something she'd said. The photo was grainy, clearly taken from a distance with a zoom lens. Below it, a single line of text. "Special treatment has consequences. Watch your back." Ethan's hands shook as he stared at the message. Someone had followed them, photographed his daughter, threatened him because Victoria had given him his job back. He was still frozen when his office door opened. Sarah stood there, her expression grim. "Ethan, we need to talk. Victoria's on her way down." "What's happening?" Ethan's voice came out rough. "Someone leaked your personnel file to the media. All of it. Your performance reviews, medical claims, everything. It's going to be all over the news in an hour." Sarah's face was tight with anger. "This is a massive violation of privacy and company policy. Victoria is furious." Ethan felt the walls closing in. "My medical claims? That means they'll know about Lily's hospitalization, about Sarah dying, about everything," Sarah confirmed quietly. "I'm so sorry, Ethan. We're pursuing legal action against whoever did this, but the damage is already done." Victoria appeared in the doorway, her face a mask of controlled fury. "Ethan, I need you to trust me right now. This is going to get ugly, but we're going to handle it. Someone sent me this." Ethan held up his phone with shaking hands, showing them the photo of Lily. Victoria's expression turned to ice. "Forward that to me immediately. Then call the police and file a report. Margaret is already getting our security team involved." "This is my fault," Ethan said, his voice breaking. "If I hadn't come back, none of this would be happening. Lily wouldn't be in danger." "This is not your fault," Victoria said sharply. "This is the fault of whoever is so threatened by change that they're willing to attack a 6-year-old child to prove a point. And we're going to find them." Sarah was already on her phone. "I'm calling campus security to meet you at Lily's school tomorrow morning. No one gets near her without clearance." The reality crashed down on Ethan. His daughter was being used as a weapon because he'd accepted a second chance. Because Victoria had tried to do the right thing. Because he dared to believe things could get better. I have to pull her out of school, he said numbly. Keep her home until this blows over. You don't have to do anything alone, Victoria said. Her voice was still controlled, but something fierce burned underneath it. We have resources. Security, legal teams. We're going to protect both of you while we figure out who's behind this. Why? The word came out as almost a plea. Why are you doing all this? I'm just one employee. This is destroying everything you've built. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer than Ethan had ever heard it. Because watching you stand in that conference room asking me not to tell your daughter you'd failed showed me what I'd lost by building my entire life around being untouchable. You taught me that real strength isn't standing alone. It's standing up for someone when you have everything to lose. She met his eyes fully. So yes, this might destroy what I've built, but what I built was broken anyway. Maybe it's time to build something better. Ethan couldn't speak past the lump in his throat. Sarah squeezed his shoulder. Go home, she said gently. Be with Lily. We'll handle the media firestorm. Tomorrow we'll set up security and figure out next steps. But tonight, just be her father. Ethan nodded and gathered his things with mechanical movements. The subway ride home passed in a blur of anxiety and fear. He kept checking his phone, half expecting another threatening message, but nothing came. Mrs. Chen was waiting when he got home, her face creased with worry. I saw the news, she said quietly. They're saying terrible things, lies about you taking advantage of Victoria's guilt, about manipulating your daughter's illness for sympathy. It's all going to come out now, Ethan said dully. Everything about Sarah, about Lily's surgery, private medical information that no one should have access to. That's illegal, Mrs. Chen said fiercely. They can't do that. Someone already did. Ethan sank onto the couch, exhaustion crashing over him. And now Lily's being targeted because I couldn't just stay fired and move on. Mrs. Chen sat beside him and took his hand. Ethan Cole, you listen to me. You did nothing wrong. You accepted a job you'd earned from a woman who realized she'd made a mistake. If people can't handle that, it says everything about them and nothing about you. Someone photographed Lily this morning, Ethan whispered. Sent me a threatening message. She's 6 years old and someone is using her to get to me. Mrs. Chen's face went hard. Then we protect her. I'll pick her up from school tomorrow. My nephew is a retired police officer. I'll ask him to stay with us during the day until this settles. And you tell that boss of yours that if she really means what she says about supporting you, now's the time to prove it. The fierce loyalty in her voice steadied something in Ethan. He wasn't alone in this. He had Mrs. Chen, Sarah, and despite everything, Victoria. But he also had a daughter sleeping peacefully in the next room, unaware that her father's choice to accept a second chance had painted a target on both their backs. Ethan went to Lily's bedroom and stood in the doorway watching her sleep. She was curled around her favorite stuffed dinosaur, her wild curls spread across the pillow, her face peaceful and innocent. He'd spent 3 years trying to give her stability and safety. Now he'd brought danger right to their door. I'm sorry, sweetheart, he whispered into the darkness. I'm so sorry. But even as he said it, he knew he wouldn't take it back, wouldn't walk away from the opportunity Victoria had given him, wouldn't let fear make him small again. He would protect Lily. He would fight for the future they deserved, and he would trust that Victoria meant what she said about standing together. Because the alternative was surrendering to people who thought kindness was weakness, and second chances were vulnerabilities to exploit. And Ethan refused to teach his daughter that cruelty always won. Victoria didn't sleep that night. She spent the dark hours in her office, coordinating with lawyers, security teams, and investigators trying to identify who had leaked Ethan's personnel file. The violation was egregious enough to warrant criminal charges. The threatening message to Ethan made it even worse. By dawn, she had a partial answer. It was an inside job, Margaret said, setting a coffee in front of Victoria at 6 a.m. It traced the file access to a terminal in HR. The timing matches Richard Brennan's administrative leave. Someone with access to his computer used his credentials after hours. Do we know who? Victoria's voice was deadly calm. Not yet, but we're reviewing security footage and narrowing down the list. Margaret hesitated. Victoria, there's something else. The board is meeting this morning. Robert called it. I think they're going to demand you step down. Victoria had expected this. She'd known from the moment she reversed Ethan's termination that she was gambling her entire career, but knowing it and facing it were different things. When? She asked. 9 a.m., emergency session. Margaret's eyes were compassionate. You don't have to go in alone. Sarah's offered to speak on your behalf. Several department heads have sent messages supporting you. Even some board members are wavering. But not enough to save my position, Victoria said quietly. Maybe not. Margaret sat down across from her. But enough to make them think twice about what they're throwing away. You've changed this company in 2 weeks, Victoria. People are noticing. They're starting to believe that maybe work doesn't have to be a place where you hide your humanity. Victoria looked out at the sunrise painting Manhattan in shades of gold and pink. She thought about her father, who'd died powerful and alone. About her ex-husband, who'd begged her to let him in before giving up. About every choice she'd made to prioritize control over connection. And she thought about Ethan Cole, standing in a conference room with nothing left but his love for his daughter, showing her what real strength looked like. If they want me to step down, I'll step down, Victoria said. But not before I make sure Ethan and Lily are protected. Not before I find whoever leaked that file and threatened a child. And not before I tell them exactly what I think about a corporate culture that punishes people for being decent. Margaret smiled. There's the Victoria I've been waiting 20 years to meet. The morning passed in a blur of preparation. At 8:45, Victoria walked into the boardroom with her head high and her heart hammering against her ribs. All 12 board members were present, faces grave. Robert Halloway sat at the head of the table, a pointed statement about who he thought should be leading this company. Victoria, he said coldly, I think we all know why we're here. I imagine you're going to ask for my resignation, Victoria replied calmly, taking her seat. So let's skip the pretense. What exactly are the charges? Poor judgment, Robert said. Allowing personal feelings to override business decisions. Creating a PR nightmare that's damaged our reputation. Putting company resources toward protecting one employee at the expense of broader corporate interests. I see. Victoria opened her briefcase and pulled out a folder. Before you continue, I'd like to share some information with you. She distributed copies around the table. Robert frowned as he scanned the contents. Employee satisfaction surveys from the past 2 weeks show a 30% increase in positive sentiment, Victoria said. Recruitment applications are up 40%. We've had 3 top-tier candidates specifically mention the Ethan Cole situation as a reason they're interested in working here, because they want to be at a company that treats people like humans. She clicked to her next slide. Our best performers have started staying late voluntarily to work on passion projects because they believe the company actually values innovation now. Department heads report improved morale and collaboration. Even our stock price is up slightly because investors like the story of a CEO who's willing to admit mistakes and evolve. Patricia Morrison was studying the data with raised eyebrows. These numbers are impressive. They're also fragile, Victoria acknowledged. If you force me out, you'll be sending a clear message that this company values power and control over growth and humanity. You'll lose the goodwill we've built. You'll lose the talented people who are watching to see if this change is real. Or we'll send a message that leadership means making tough calls, Robert countered. That we don't abandon our principles the first time someone tells a sad story. Ethan Cole didn't tell me a sad story, Victoria said quietly. He asked me not to destroy his daughter's faith in him. And I realized that I'd built a company where people had to hide the most important parts of their lives in order to succeed, where being a devoted parent was treated as a liability instead of an asset. She stood, planting her hands on the table. You want to fire me? Go ahead. But first, look at what we've accomplished in 2 weeks. Look at the culture shift. Look at the possibility of becoming a company that people actually want to work for, not just one they tolerate for a paycheck. This is emotional manipulation, Robert said. You're making business decisions based on feelings instead of facts. Oh, I'm making business decisions based on the fact that our most valuable asset is our people, and we've been treating them like expendable resources, Victoria shot back. Yes, I care about Ethan Cole. Yes, I feel responsible for protecting him and his daughter, but I also recognize that what happened to him is symptomatic of larger problems we need to fix. She pulled out another document. This is a formal complaint from 6 employees in Richard Brennan's former department. They're alleging systematic harassment, credit theft, and creating a hostile work environment. This isn't about one person, Robert. This is about a culture that's been broken for years, and I'm trying to fix it before we lose everyone worth keeping. The room fell silent. Patricia and several other board members were passing the complaint around, their expressions growing increasingly troubled. Why didn't these complaints come forward before? Patricia asked. Because people were afraid they'd be fired for speaking up, Victoria said bluntly. Brennan had a reputation for destroying anyone who challenged him. It took my very public reversal of Ethan's termination to make people believe they might actually be heard. Robert was beginning to look uncertain. Even if all of this is true, the media circus around Ethan Cole has been damaging. The media circus was created by someone illegally leaking his personnel file and threatening his child, Victoria said, steel entering her voice. We're pursuing criminal charges against whoever did that. And when we catch them, I'm going to make sure everyone knows that this company doesn't tolerate people who weaponize private information or target children. She sat back down, meeting each board member's eyes in turn. I'm not asking you to agree with every decision I've made. I'm asking you to consider whether you want to be the board that fired a CEO for trying to make this company better. Whether you want to send a message that admitting mistakes is fatal. Whether you're willing to sacrifice real progress because it made you uncomfortable. The silence stretched. Finally, Patricia spoke. I'd like to propose we table the question of Victoria's leadership for 30 days. Use that time to monitor the results of these cultural changes, investigate the Brennan situation fully, and see if the positive trends continue. Can we agree on that? Slowly, reluctantly, hands went up around the table. Roberts was the last to rise. 30 days, he said coldly. But Victoria, if this experiment fails, you're done. And you'll take Ethan Cole down with you. Victoria met his eyes without flinching. Understood. The meeting adjourned. Victoria gathered her materials with steady hands while board members filed out, some avoiding her gaze, others offering small nods of support. Margaret was waiting outside. You survived. For 30 days, Victoria said. Then we'll see if I was brave or just reckless. Her phone buzzed, a text from Ethan. Security is at Lily's school. She thinks having a bodyguard is the coolest thing ever. Thank you for this. Victoria found herself smiling despite everything. She texted back, tell her that brave people sometimes need backup. We're in this together. She returned to her office and stood at the window, looking out at the city that had been her kingdom for so long. Somewhere down there, Ethan was probably walking Lily to school, surrounded by security guards he should never have needed. Fighting battles he shouldn't have to fight because Victoria had decided to challenge a system designed to crush anyone who showed weakness. But she'd also given him a chance to thrive, to use his brilliant mind on projects that mattered, to be a father without apology, and maybe that was worth risking everything. Victoria's phone rang. Her private investigator's name appeared on screen. Tell me you found something, she said. Better. I found someone. The investigator's voice was grim. You're not going to like who it is. 20 minutes later, Victoria was in a secured conference room with her legal team, the head of security, and a laptop showing surveillance footage from 3 nights ago. The figure on screen moved through the darkened HR office with practiced ease, sitting at Richard Brennan's computer and accessing Ethan's personnel file. The camera angle wasn't perfect, but it was clear enough to identify the person. Victoria's stomach turned. Jennifer Marks, the security chief confirmed. Senior HR manager. 15 years with the company. She was one of Brennan's mentees early in her career. Do we know why? Victoria asked, though she could guess. The investigator pulled up email records. She sent Brennan several messages after his administrative leave started. The language suggests they had, or have, a personal relationship. She was angry about your decision to investigate him, felt you were being vindictive. Victoria read the emails with growing disgust. Jennifer had called Ethan opportunistic and manipulative, had accused Victoria of destroying a good man's career over one employee's sob story, had written that someone needed to expose the truth about Cole's performance issues. She leaked the file and sent the threatening photo? Victoria asked. We believe so. She has no alibi for the morning the photo was taken. And we found the same threatening message in her draft folder. She was careless enough not to delete it. She threatened a child to protect her lover's reputation, Victoria said flatly. Please tell me we can press charges. Already in motion, the legal team lead confirmed. Illegal disclosure of confidential information, criminal harassment, potentially stalking. We're coordinating with police. She'll be arrested within the hour. Victoria felt sick. Jennifer Marks had been part of company culture for 15 years, had helped craft HR policies, had sat across from struggling employees and decided their fates. And she'd seen nothing wrong with threatening a 6-year-old to punish her father for accepting a second chance. I want a complete review of everyone involved in Brennan's network, Victoria said. Anyone who enabled his behavior or might retaliate like this. I want them identified and either retrained or removed. No exceptions. The team nodded and left to execute the plan. Victoria sat alone in the conference room, staring at the frozen image of Jennifer Marks accessing files she had no right to touch. This was the culture she'd built. This was what happened when you valued loyalty over ethics, control over compassion, winning over doing what was right. Her phone buzzed. Sarah's name appeared. Ethan just finished his first prototype for the AI integration project, Sarah said, excitement clear in her voice. Victoria, it's brilliant, better than anything I expected. The board is going to lose their minds when they see what he can do. Good, Victoria said quietly, because we're going to need proof that taking risks on people is worth it. Are you okay? Sarah asked, her tone shifting to concern. I'm fine, just tired. Liar. Sarah's voice was gentle. You're carrying the weight of this entire company on your shoulders and wondering if you made the right choice. But Victoria, you did. Even if everything falls apart, you did the right thing. Victoria closed her eyes. I'm going to hold you to that in 30 days when the board votes. In 30 days, they're going to see what I see. That this company is better because you finally remembered that strength isn't standing alone. Sarah paused. Come down and see Ethan's prototype. Let yourself feel proud of what you've enabled. Victoria ended the call and sat in the silence for another moment. Then she stood, straightened her jacket, and walked down to the research floor with her head high. Ethan was in his office, multiple monitors showing code and 3D visualizations. He looked up when Victoria knocked, his expression cautious. Sarah said you wanted me to see something, Victoria said. Ethan stood and gestured to his screens. It's still rough, but I think we can integrate AI support into the research platform in ways that will save teams hundreds of hours. Watch this. He walked her through the prototype with the enthusiasm of someone who'd finally been given permission to use his full capabilities. His ideas were innovative, thoughtful, and exactly the kind of breakthrough thinking the company needed. Victoria watched him work and felt something shift in her chest. This was why she'd risked everything. Not because Ethan had a sad story, but because he had potential that had been buried under impossible circumstances. And now that potential was finally visible. This is exceptional, Victoria said when he finished. Present it to the board next week. Show them what's possible when we support people instead of punishing them. Ethan's smile was tentative but genuine. Thank you for everything. I know it's costing you. It's worth it, Victoria said simply. She meant it with every fiber of her being. Even if it destroyed her, this was worth it. That evening, the news broke about Jennifer Marks' arrest. Ethan was making dinner when his phone exploded with notifications. He read the headlines with shaking hands while Lily set the table, oblivious to the storm raging in the digital world. Former HR manager arrested for leaking confidential files and threatening employee's child. Langford Technologies scandal deepens as insider attacks. Resurface debate on corporate culture. CEO Victoria Langford doubles down. We will not tolerate those who weaponize private information. There was a video clip from Victoria's statement to the press. Ethan clicked play and watched her face fill the screen. Calm, controlled, absolutely certain. This company will not be held hostage by people who believe cruelty is strength, Victoria said to the cameras. What happened to Ethan Cole and his daughter is unconscionable, but it's also symptomatic of a larger problem, a culture that punished empathy and rewarded ruthlessness. That ends now. We're building something better, and anyone who can't adapt will be left behind. The reporter pressed, Some say you're destroying company morale by creating this controversy. How do you respond? Victoria's smile was sharp as a knife. I'd say that anyone whose morale is destroyed by the idea that we should treat employees like human beings was never someone we wanted here anyway. Good riddance. The clip ended. Ethan sat staring at his phone, overwhelmed. Daddy, the spaghetti is getting cold, Lily called. Ethan set down his phone and joined her at the table. They ate together while she chattered about school and the super cool security person who'd walked her to class. She had no idea that her father's CEO had just publicly declared war on everyone who'd tried to destroy them. After dinner, after homework, after bedtime stories, Ethan finally allowed himself to process what had happened. Victoria had protected him, protected Lily, put her entire career on the line to prove that doing the right thing mattered more than protecting the status quo. And she'd done it without hesitation, without asking for anything in return. Ethan pulled out his phone and typed a message. I saw your press conference. Thank you doesn't feel like enough, but thank you for everything. The response came immediately. We protect our people. That's the company we're building. Get some rest, Ethan. Tomorrow we show them what's possible. Ethan smiled and set down his phone. Outside, the city hummed with its usual chaos. Inside, his daughter slept peacefully, safe, because someone had finally chosen to stand up instead of stand aside. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, Ethan let himself believe that maybe they really would be okay. That maybe second chances weren't just beautiful stories, they were real, hard-won, and absolutely worth fighting for. He just hoped Victoria's 30 days would be enough to prove it. The 30 days passed like a storm, fierce, transformative, and impossible to ignore. Ethan's AI integration prototype became the talk of the research division within the first week. By week 2, other departments were requesting demonstrations. By week 3, the board had moved up their timeline to see it because preliminary results were exceeding every projection. But the real transformation was happening in the spaces between the data points. It started small. A junior developer mentioned his mother's cancer treatment during a team meeting and wasn't met with awkward silence. Instead, his manager adjusted his deadlines and offered remote work flexibility. A project coordinator brought her infant to the office when childcare fell through and found colleagues volunteering to hold the baby during conference calls instead of complaints about professionalism. People stopped hiding their humanity and discovered that vulnerability didn't make them weak, it made them connected. Victoria watched it unfold from her office, seeing the company shift in ways she'd never imagined possible. But she also watched the clock tick down toward the board's final decision, knowing that 1 month of progress might not be enough to save her position. On day 28, Sarah knocked on her door with an expression Victoria had learned to read as, "Brace yourself." The board moved the meeting up, Sarah said. Tomorrow morning, Robert convinced them they have enough data to make a decision. Victoria nodded slowly. She'd known this was coming. Robert had been quiet for weeks, too quiet. That meant he'd been building his case, gathering ammunition, preparing for the kill shot. What's the sentiment? Victoria asked. Split. Patricia and 4 others are solidly in your corner. Robert has 3 definite votes against you. That leaves 4 undecided who could swing either way. Sarah sat down heavily. Victoria, even if you survive this vote, Robert's going to keep coming for you. He sees this as a referendum on everything he believes about business. He's right, Victoria said quietly. It is. That evening, Victoria stayed late reviewing every metric, every employee survey, every piece of evidence that the past month had been worth the risk. The numbers were undeniable. Productivity up, turnover down, recruitment applications at an all-time high. But she knew Robert would argue that correlation wasn't causation, that 1 good month didn't prove sustainable change. She was still working at 9 p.m. when her desk phone rang. The caller ID showed the security desk downstairs. Ms. Langford, there's someone here to see you. Says it's urgent. Victoria frowned. Who? Ethan Cole. And he has about 20 other people with him. Confusion turned to curiosity. Send them up. 5 minutes later, Victoria's office door opened to reveal not just Ethan, but a crowd of employees she recognized from across departments. Some were from research, others from marketing, finance, operations. All of them looked determined. What's going on? Victoria asked. Ethan stepped forward, holding a thick folder. We heard about the board meeting tomorrow. We wanted you to have this before you go in. He handed her the folder. Victoria opened it to find page after page of handwritten letters, testimonials from employees about how the cultural changes of the past month had affected them. There are 63 letters in there, Ethan said quietly, from people across every department. They're all stories about how the past month changed their experience here, how they finally feel like they can be whole people instead of just workers. Victoria flipped through the pages, her throat tightening as she read. My son has autism, and I've been terrified to mention it for 3 years. Last week, I finally asked for flexible scheduling for his therapy appointments, and my manager said yes without hesitation. For the first time, I don't feel like I have to choose between my child and my career. I've been dealing with depression and couldn't afford the time off to get help. The new mental health policy gave me 2 weeks paid leave, and when I came back, my team had covered my projects without complaint. They saved my life. I'm a single mom, and I've been 1 bad month away from losing everything since my divorce. The daycare subsidy program that was just announced means I can actually breathe. I can focus on my work knowing my daughter is safe. Story after story, person after person. Lives changed by the simple act of treating employees like humans who mattered. Victoria looked up at the crowd gathered in her office. You didn't have to do this. Yes, we did, said a woman Victoria recognized from accounting. Because if the board fires you tomorrow, we want them to know exactly what they're throwing away. We want them to understand that this isn't about one employee or one CEO. It's about whether this company has a soul. We're also prepared to make noise if they vote against you, added a man from IT. Public statements, press coverage. We've already drafted a letter that 58 employees are willing to sign and publish. Robert Halloway might think he can go back to business as usual, but we're not going to let that happen quietly. Victoria felt something break open in her chest. These people, many of whom she'd never spoken to directly, were willing to risk their own positions to support her. Not because she was perfect, but because she'd finally tried to build something worth protecting. Thank you, she managed, her voice rough with emotion. This means more than you know. The crowd began to disperse, but Ethan lingered. When they were alone, he stepped closer. I wanted to tell you something, he said quietly. Before tomorrow, whatever happens. Victoria waited. 3 weeks ago, Lily asked me why my boss was being so nice to me. She wanted to know if you were like a fairy godmother. Ethan smiled slightly. I told her you weren't magic. You were just someone who'd learned that being strong meant helping people instead of hurting them. And she said, Daddy, I think she's brave. His eyes met Victoria's fully. My 6-year-old daughter understands something that apparently half your board doesn't. What you did was brave, not just reinstating me, but everything since. Admitting you were wrong, standing up to people who thought cruelty was strength, building something better even though it might destroy you. He paused. Sarah died believing the world was harder than she could handle. But if she could see what you've done here, how you fought to make this place more humane, I think she'd have had more hope. Victoria's eyes burned. She blinked hard against the tears threatening to spill. I don't feel brave, she admitted. I feel terrified that I've risked everything for nothing. You haven't risked it for nothing, Ethan said firmly. Look around. Look at what's already changed. Even if they fire you tomorrow, you've proven that a different way is possible. People will remember that. He handed her one more piece of paper, a drawing in crayon showing a tall woman in a suit standing next to a man and a little girl. Above them, Lily had written in careful letters, Miss Victoria is my daddy's friend, and she is very brave. Victoria took the drawing with shaking hands and felt the tears finally spill over. I'm framing this, she said, her voice breaking. Ethan smiled. She'll be thrilled. Good luck tomorrow, Victoria. We're all rooting for you. After he left, Victoria sat alone in her office, holding Lily's drawing and the folder of testimonials. She thought about her father dying alone, about her ex-husband who'd begged her to let him in, about every choice she'd made in the name of strength that had actually just been fear. And she thought about Ethan standing in a conference room asking her not to tell his daughter he'd failed, showing her what real strength actually looked like. Tomorrow, the board would decide her fate. But tonight, holding evidence that her choices had mattered to real people with real lives, Victoria finally understood what her father had been trying to tell her at the end. Strength wasn't standing alone. It was building something worth standing with others to protect. The board meeting convened at 8 a.m. in the executive conference room. Victoria arrived early, impeccably dressed, carrying the folder of employee testimonials and Lily's drawing. She'd barely slept, but her hands were steady as she took her seat at the table. The board members filed in, some meeting her eyes with support, others with hostility, most with careful neutrality. Robert Halloway entered last, his expression smug in a way that made Victoria's stomach turn. "Let's begin," Patricia Morrison said, taking charge before Robert could. "We're here to evaluate Victoria's leadership over the past 30 days and determine if the changes implemented have been beneficial or detrimental to company interests." Robert immediately pulled out his own folder. "I've prepared a comprehensive analysis showing that while some metrics have improved, the costs have been substantial. The media attention alone has damaged our reputation with conservative investors. The flexibility policies have increased operational complexity, and the cultural changes have created friction with our more traditional clients." He distributed his materials. Victoria skimmed them and saw exactly what she'd expected, cherry-picked data emphasizing problems while downplaying successes. "Additionally," Robert continued, "the situation with Ethan Cole has created a perception that we're soft on performance standards. I've received inquiries from competitors suggesting they see us as weakened and vulnerable to poaching our clients." "Interesting," Patricia said dryly. "I've received inquiries from 3 Fortune 500 companies asking about our new policies because they want to implement similar changes. Apparently, treating employees well is becoming a competitive advantage." Robert's jaw tightened. "Short-term PR wins don't translate to sustainable business results." "Then let's look at sustainable results," Victoria said calmly. She pulled out her own presentation. "Employee retention is up 18%. Productivity per employee is up 12%. Our employee referral program has seen a 300% increase in quality candidates. And our top performers, the people we can't afford to lose, report significantly higher job satisfaction." She clicked to her next slide. "More importantly, innovation is up. Ethan Cole's AI integration project is projected to save the company over $3 million annually. Sarah Okonkwo's team has submitted twice as many patent applications this month as they did in the previous 6 months combined. When people aren't spending energy hiding their lives, they spend it creating value." "Creative accounting of metrics," Robert dismissed. "You're attributing causation where there's only correlation." "Then explain this." Victoria distributed the folder of employee testimonials. 63 employees across all departments, explaining in their own words how the cultural changes have affected their work and lives. "Read them, all of them. Then tell me this is just correlation." The board members began reading. Victoria watched their expressions shift as they absorbed story after story of lives improved, potential unlocked, humanity restored. One board member, James Chen, who'd been on the fence, looked up with wet eyes. "There's a letter here from someone in my own department. I had no idea she was dealing with a parent with Alzheimer's. She writes that the new caregiver leave policy means she can actually be there for her mother's final months without destroying her career." "Emotional manipulation," Robert said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. "It's evidence," Patricia corrected sharply. "Evidence that Victoria's approach is working exactly as intended, creating a workplace where people can thrive instead of just survive." Another board member spoke up. "I've been skeptical of these changes, but I can't ignore the recruitment data. We're attracting talent we couldn't have gotten 6 months ago. People want to work here because of what Victoria's doing." "People want to work here because we're in the news," Robert countered. "When the publicity fades, so will the interest." "Or," Victoria said quietly, "when the publicity fades, we'll have built a culture strong enough to sustain itself. A company where people stay because they're valued, not just because the paycheck clears." She stood and placed Lily's drawing on the table. "A 6-year-old girl drew this. She thinks I'm brave because I helped her father. But the truth is, her father taught me what bravery actually means. It means admitting when you're wrong. It means standing up for people when it costs you everything. It means building something better, even when everyone tells you it's impossible." Victoria met each board member's eyes in turn. "My father built this company on discipline and ruthlessness. He died alone, having sacrificed every meaningful relationship for power." I've spent my entire life following his example. And then I met a man who'd lost everything but still had the strength to ask me to protect his daughter's faith in him. That moment showed me that everything I thought I knew about strength was wrong. She gestured to the testimonials scattered across the table. These 63 people represent hundreds more who are watching to see if this change is real. If you fire me today, you're telling them it was all just a temporary aberration, that we're going back to the old way where people were resources to be exploited, not humans to be valued, and you'll lose them, not all at once, but slowly, as they realize that nothing really changed. Robert started to interrupt, but Victoria raised her hand. But if you keep me, you're committing to transformation, to building a company that succeeds because we bring out the best in people, not because we wring every drop of productivity from them before they burn out. Yes, it's harder. Yes, it requires trust and flexibility and admitting we don't have all the answers, but the results speak for themselves. She sat back down. I'm not asking you to choose me over Robert's vision for sentimental reasons. I'm asking you to choose data over dogma, evidence over ideology, a future where this company is known for excellence and humanity, not just ruthless efficiency. The room fell silent. Patricia looked around the table. I'd like to call for a vote, she said. All in favor of maintaining Victoria Langford as CEO and continuing the current cultural transformation? Hands went up slowly. Patricia, James Chen, 3 others, 6 total. All opposed? Robert and 2 others. 3. 3 board members hadn't voted yet. The room held its breath. Finally, Margaret Winchester, a board member who'd been silent throughout the meeting, raised her hand. In favor, she said quietly. My daughter works here. She told me last week that for the first time in 3 years, she doesn't dread coming to work. That's worth more than any efficiency metric. 7-3. One more vote, and Victoria would have the majority. The final undecided board member was Thomas Rodriguez, the oldest member of the board and a close friend of Victoria's late father. He'd been staring at Lily's drawing throughout the entire discussion. He picked it up carefully. Your father and I built this company together, he said, his voice heavy with memory. We sacrificed everything for it. Marriages, children, health. And in the end, he died telling you to be strong enough to stand alone. Thomas met Victoria's eyes. I was there that day. I heard what he said. And I've wondered ever since if he meant it as advice or as a warning. He set down the drawing. I think he was warning you not to make his mistakes, not to confuse isolation with strength, not to build an empire so cold that no warmth could survive in it. Thomas raised his hand. I vote in favor of Victoria's continued leadership. And I vote to formally recognize that this company's greatest asset isn't our technology or our market position, it's our people. It's time we started acting like it. 8-3. Victoria had won. Robert stood abruptly. This is a mistake. You're choosing feelings over facts, sentiment over strategy. When this fails, remember that I warned you. If this fails, you'll have the satisfaction of being right, Patricia said coolly. But I don't think it will. Motion carries. Victoria remains CEO with full authority to continue implementing cultural changes. Robert stormed out. The other 2 dissenting members followed more slowly. The remaining board members approached Victoria with handshakes and quiet words of support. When the room finally cleared, Patricia lingered. That was the hardest fought battle I've seen in this boardroom, she said. You risked everything on a principle. I hope you understand how rare that is. I hope I've proven it's worth it, Victoria replied. Patricia smiled. You're proving it every day. Now go tell your people they've won. Victoria left the boardroom and found Margaret waiting with tears streaming down her face. I heard, her assistant said. Victoria, I'm so proud of you. Victoria pulled her into a hug, something she'd never done in 15 years of working together. Thank you for believing in me even when I didn't believe in myself. She composed herself and called Sarah. Gather everyone in the main auditorium. I want to address the entire company. An hour later, Victoria stood on the stage facing hundreds of employees who'd crammed into the space to hear the verdict. The energy was electric with anxiety and hope. I'll make this brief, Victoria said into the microphone. The board has voted to maintain the cultural changes we've implemented over the past month. More than that, They voted to formalize our commitment to treating employees as our greatest asset. The room erupted in applause and cheers. Victoria waited for it to subside. This didn't happen because of me. It happened because of every single person who took a risk by being honest about their struggles. Every parent who stopped hiding their children. Every person dealing with health issues who asked for flexibility. Every employee who decided to trust that maybe, just maybe, work didn't have to be a place where you sacrificed your humanity. She found Ethan in the crowd. He was standing with Lily on his shoulders. She'd apparently been brought in for the occasion, wearing a dress covered in stars and grinning from ear to ear. 31 days ago, I fired a man who didn't deserve it. He taught me that real strength isn't standing alone, it's standing up for others when you have everything to lose. Today, all of you taught me that transformation isn't a top-down mandate. It's a collective choice to build something better together. Victoria smiled, and for the first time in years, it felt completely genuine. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to have hard days. But we're going to face them as a company that values people as much as profits, as a place where you can be whole humans, not just workers. And if that makes us different from every other corporation out there, then good. Different is exactly what we need to be. The applause was deafening. Victoria stepped down from the stage and was immediately surrounded by people thanking her, hugging her, sharing stories of how the past month had changed their lives. She made her way through the crowd to where Ethan stood with Lily. The little girl reached out immediately, and Victoria found herself holding a 6-year-old who looked at her with absolute trust. "You won," Lily announced. "Daddy said you were very brave and you won." "We all won," Victoria corrected gently, "because we decided to be brave together." Lily beamed and then whispered conspiratorially, "Daddy says you're not a fairy godmother, but I think maybe you are a little bit magic." Victoria laughed, a real full laugh that felt like breathing for the first time in decades. "I think maybe you are too, Lily." Ethan took his daughter back and met Victoria's eyes over her wild curls. No words were necessary. Everything they'd been through, everything they'd risked, everything they'd won, it was all there in that moment of shared understanding. "Thank you," Ethan said quietly. "Thank you," Victoria replied, "for showing me what actually matters." 6 months later, Victoria stood in a completely different space, the newly constructed rooftop garden that had been built specifically for employees' families. The space was gorgeous, full of plants and play structures and quiet corners for parents to work while their children played safely nearby. It had been Ethan's idea, refined by a committee of parent employees, and funded by reallocating the budget that used to go to team-building activities no one enjoyed. Now it was opening day, and the rooftop was full of children laughing and parents relaxing in a way that would have been unthinkable a year ago. Victoria watched Lily race through the garden with a pack of other kids, shrieking with joy as they played some elaborate game involving dragons and treasure. Ethan stood nearby talking with Sarah, both of them animated about the latest research project that was already generating industry buzz. The past 6 months had been hard. Some employees had left, unable to adapt to a culture that valued collaboration over competition. Some clients had moved to competitors who promised more traditional approaches. Robert Halloway had resigned from the board and taken 2 of his allies with him, but the company had grown stronger. Recruitment was at an all-time high. Innovation was flourishing. Employee satisfaction scores were the highest in company history, and the stock price had actually increased as investors recognized that happy employees meant better products and more sustainable growth. Victoria had been profiled in 3 major business magazines as a CEO who'd revolutionized corporate culture by choosing humanity over ruthlessness. She'd given speeches about the transformation, written op-eds about leadership, and become an unlikely champion for workplace reform. But the real proof was here, in this garden, watching employees bring their whole selves to work without fear. "Victoria!" She turned to find Lily running toward her, clutching something in her fist. The little girl crashed into her legs with the full-body enthusiasm of a 6-year-old who decided someone was worth loving. "Look what I found!" Lily opened her hand to reveal a ladybug. "Isn't she beautiful? I'm going to name her Victoria." "I'm honored," Victoria said solemnly. "That's a very important name for a very special ladybug." Lily carefully transferred the insect to a leaf and then looked up at Victoria with those serious eyes that saw too much. Are you happy now? The little girl asked. The question caught Victoria off guard. What makes you ask that? Daddy says you used to be sad even though you had lots of money and power, but now you smile more. Lily tilted her head. So, are you happy? Victoria thought about her apartment, still beautiful but no longer sterile, now decorated with photos of company events and employee families. She thought about the friends she'd made, the relationships she'd rebuilt, the ex-husband who'd reached out after seeing her transformation and asked if maybe they could try coffee sometime. She thought about the board meetings that were now collaborations instead of battles, about walking through the building and knowing people's names, their stories, their struggles and triumphs. She thought about standing in this garden surrounded by children and families, building something that actually mattered. Yes, Victoria said honestly, I'm happy now. Lily threw her arms around Victoria's waist. Good. You deserve to be happy. You're my favorite boss even though I don't work here. Victoria hugged her back, this child who'd changed everything without even knowing it. Over Lily's head, she met Ethan's eyes across the garden. He smiled and raised his coffee cup in a small salute. The sun was setting, painting the Manhattan skyline in shades of gold and amber. From up here, the city looked different than it had from her old office window. Less like a conquered territory, and more like a community full of people trying to build good lives. Victoria had spent 42 years learning the wrong lessons about strength and power. It had taken a single father and his 6-year-old daughter to teach her what actually mattered. Not standing alone at the top, but standing together with people worth fighting for. Sarah appeared at her elbow. The caterers are asking if we're ready for the formal dedication ceremony. Give me 5 more minutes, Victoria said. I want to just watch for a bit. Sarah squeezed her shoulder and left. Victoria stood at the edge of the garden, taking in the scene. Parents helping children navigate the playground, colleagues sharing stories about their families, people laughing and relaxing in ways that would have scandalized the old guard. This was what she'd risked everything to build. Not a perfect company, but a human one. Not an empire of steel and glass, but a community of people who supported each other through struggles and celebrated each other's triumphs. Ethan approached with 2 glasses of champagne. Sarah told me to bring you this. She said you've earned it. Victoria accepted the glass. We've all earned it. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the garden come alive with laughter and connection. Finally, Ethan spoke. Lily asked me yesterday what happened to make you change your mind about firing me. I didn't know how to explain it. What did you tell her? I told her that sometimes people forget what's important because they're scared. But when they remember, they get brave enough to fix their mistakes. Ethan smiled slightly. She asked if that meant grown-ups were allowed to make mistakes and change their minds. What did you say? I said that's exactly what it means. That being grown up isn't about being perfect. It's about being brave enough to admit when you're wrong and strong enough to make it right. He met Victoria's eyes. She liked that answer. Victoria felt her throat tighten. She's lucky to have you as a father. She's lucky to have you in her life too, Ethan said quietly. We both are. The dedication ceremony began, and Victoria moved to the microphone to officially open the garden. She spoke about the importance of family, about building workplaces that recognize people as whole humans, about the courage it took to choose a different path. But mostly, she looked out at the faces in the crowd, people who'd trusted her to lead them somewhere better, who'd risked their own comfort to build something more humane, and felt a pride that had nothing to do with quarterly earnings or market dominance. This was legacy. This was what actually lasted. Not buildings or bank accounts, but lives changed and community built, and the knowledge that you'd used your power to make things better instead of just bigger. As the sun set fully and lights twinkled on across the garden, Lily found Victoria again and grabbed her hand. Can I tell you a secret? The little girl whispered. Of course. Lily leaned in close. Daddy told me that you saved us, but I think maybe we saved you too. Victoria's eyes burned with tears she didn't try to hide. I think you might be right about that. Lily smiled, the pure, radiant smile of a child who'd been given the greatest gift any kid could receive. A father who was present and happy, working at a place that valued him as a person instead of just a resource. And beside her, Ethan stood talking with colleagues who'd become friends, working on projects that challenged him, building a life that had room for both ambition and love. Victoria had started this journey thinking she was giving one man a second chance. She'd ended it discovering that she'd given herself one too. The garden party continued into the evening, full of laughter and connection, and the sound of children playing without a care in the world. Victoria moved through it all feeling lighter than she had in decades, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but also new opportunities to prove that kindness wasn't weakness. That compassion was actually the strongest foundation you could build on, and that sometimes the people you save end up saving you right back. High above Manhattan, in a garden built for families and filled with hope, Victoria Langford finally understood what her father had been trying to tell her at the end. Strength wasn't standing alone. It was choosing to stand with others, even when it cost you everything, especially then, because that's when it mattered most.